So, how do we start to help a fearful dog? So the reason I'm saying start to help a fearful dog is because sometimes it can be a really, really long process. And sometimes human beings are very, very impatient, and we need to go at the dog's pace. So before you would train a dog, and before you would start working with a dog, you need to have what we call a management strategy. So while you're modifying a dog's behavior, you need a way to live your life that's manageable without exposing your dog to something that stresses them out. So for example, when I'm working with people, and if I have a very fearful puppy or a very fearful dog, then I want to avoid my dog or my puppy that I'm minding meaning people in a scenario where I can't manage. So for someone, for example, if I was bringing my fearful dog on a walk, I need a way to manage to make sure that nobody is going to come near me or approach that dog because they're not ready for it. And every time that happens, the dog gets really stressed and cortisol is released in the body. And then that stays there for 3 to 6 days, and it becomes a cycle of the dog getting more and more and more stressed. So I need to make sure that I have something in place and I know what I'm going to do before I start training my dog. So when I start training my dog, I need to have some kind of system, like being already have a line that I'm going to say to people, already not having people in my home, or already setting up a scenario or setting up a safe place where my dog can be. So a baby gate or something like that. So when I'm trying to change a dog's perception of things, especially for a dog who's fearful of people. Dogs are fearful of people if they're worried about being touched by people. That's mainly their fear. They're just uncomfortable. They haven't been socialized enough. They haven't been handled. And remember, a dog who might likely come from a rescue scenario, from maybe a puppy farm or puppy mill, the first interactions with people would have been really unpleasant. And then after that, their next interactions would have been like veterinary treatment and maybe even grooming, and that can be even fearful. So when you work with a dog, I like you to think about your own fears, because it allows you then to understand fear. Fear is very complicated. It's very personal. It's something that's pretty automatic. It's often you can't control it. So if you've got a fear of, say, spiders or rats or mice, often just by me talking about spiders or rats or mice, or heights or sharks or whatever it might be, that can often make your heart rate race. It can almost make your palms feel a bit sweaty or your heart pump faster, and you don't even have to see those things to make you scared. And the same goes for your dog. On sight of somebody, the body will already be having an automatic reaction to whatever the dog finds scary. So for example, if a person came into the room and you have a fearful puppy, the second that person walks into the room, that dog is already going to be looking for a way to cope or a little mechanism to get out. They'll be watching that person, because that's what happens when you have a person or a dog who has fear. You watch whatever is scary for you. You want to make sure it doesn't come near you. And depending on how fearful that dog is, that dog might be comfortable with somebody 10 feet away. They might be comfortable for someone 20 feet away. And they might panic or bark or lunge or growl at anything that's closer than that. Or you might have a dog that actually can't cope with people 50 feet away or 100 feet away. Every dog is different, and you have to go at the dog's pace. So when we're working with dogs, we want to, for the most part, we want to pair seeing something that's scary for the dog with something that's really rewarding for the dog. But you have to do that in an environment where the dog is aware of the scary person. And I keep saying scary person because I want you to know that the dog actually finds it fearful, and the dog cannot control his or herself in that scenario. So you have to start at a distance where the dog isn't panicking. So once a dog panics or barks or growls or lunges or reacts or anything like they're having a panic attack, you cannot change, and a dog cannot learn in that kind of scenario, in that kind of environment. You can't learn when you're panicking and you're freaking out. So with this dog, it's the same. So you need to find the dog's, what we call their threshold, the place where they're aware of the scary person, but they're not yet trying to flee, and they're not yet trying to react to keep that person away. And we start then. Okay, so this is the first thing, the first point that I do. I find out what that dog's threshold is so that I can work with that dog. And I want to teach the dog that everything good happens when that person is present, or that scary person is present. I want to do what's in the picture. This is, as you can see in that picture, that puppy is very fearful of that hand approaching them. They're shying away, they're trying to move away, and they're trapped. So in that scenario, dog is very, very likely to snap or growl or bite, or just have a complete panic on the lead. Putting your hands towards a fearful dog is a big no-no. So what I want to do is, I want to, when my puppy or my dog who's fearful sees a stranger who they're scared of, I want to immediately pop a treat in my dog's mouth. And it has to be the higher reward the treat, the quicker the dog will learn. So say a piece of chicken. And then what will happen when the dog eats a piece of chicken, they'll look back at the stranger, and I'll pop in another piece of chicken. And they'll look back at the stranger, and I'll pop another piece of chicken back in. So what you end up with is the dog, every time the dog looks at the scary stranger, something good is happening. And if the dog eats the food, then the dog is having a positive association with that scary person. And what will happen is, all going well, is the dog will start to look at the person and look back at you, and look at the person and look back at you. And that means that the dog is associating the sight of that person with something good happening. Okay, and what will happen is the dog's emotional response to that person will start to change, and the dog will start to get excited when they look at the person. It becomes really, really fun for them, because now it's a game. All in the meantime, the person is not approaching the dog, the person is ignoring the dog, the person is not trying to interact with the dog, and all the time you're keeping the dog calm, and you're making sure that the dog stays what we call under their threshold. How do I know if the dog is becoming over their threshold? Is the dog will stop eating. So if a dog was eating and they're no longer eating anymore, then it means that they've been too long in that stressful situation, and I need to either get the stranger to leave, or I need to move the dog away and get them calm again and make them sure they relax them. So we go by the speed of the dog. If the dog won't eat, it either means I'm too close to the person, that the food isn't high rewarding enough, and that maybe I have to do some distance work first. So what I mean by that, instead of giving a food reward, I'll have the puppy look at the stranger, and I'll say, let's go, and we'll move the opposite direction. And that's something I can train independently of people. So that's one of the things that I'll start with when I'm working with a fearful dog, trying to associate. And I can do that on a walk, and I can do that in my arms, and I can do that on my knee. I always want to comfort a dog when they're scared. Comforting fear does not make it worse. A lot of people will say, oh, don't comfort that dog, don't pick up that dog, you'll make them more scared. But actually that's not true. If you're scared and somebody comforts you, that doesn't make you more fearful. It might do nothing, but it definitely doesn't make you more fearful of whatever you're nervous of. The only thing that can make you more nervous is that if the scary thing, the person themselves, does something unpleasant to the dog, or comes over to the dog, or if I, for example, shout at a dog. So you should never shout or punish or give out to a dog that growls or lunges or barks or anything like that. It's a communication that the dog is telling you that they are uncomfortable and they need to get away from whatever is fearful for them. And if you punish the dog, all you'll end up doing is, or give out to the dog, is all you'll end up doing is stopping the dog warning you. And the next level will be that the dog will bite, and they won't give any warning, and that's a much more dangerous dog to work with. So that's what I'll start with, and I'll often have somebody come into a room, and I'll sit in a chair, and they'll just read a book, and I'll start then moving a puppy around, and every time the puppy notices the person or looks at the person, then I'll give them a treat, until we get into the sequence where the dog kind of gets excited to see the person. Another technique that I'll do is that I will put treats or toys outside a room or outside a house, and when somebody is coming in, I'll make sure they become armed with them, and as they walk into the room, they'll drop and throw little treats all over the place for the puppy to find, for the puppy to chase after, for the puppy to pick up and eat, depending on how fearful the puppy is. And I will get that person to ignore the puppy completely. Do not look at the puppy, do not interact with the puppy. All you're doing is slowly and calmly throwing treats all over the floor. Never hand the treats to the puppy. The problem is with a dog who's fearful, they'll often take food from someone they're fearful of, but it won't be pleasant for the dog. It'll be uncomfortable. Okay, it's like if you get a hug and you don't really want a hug. Any kind of touch or any kind of interaction that's not invited is really unpleasant. So although the dog might take the treat, they'll quickly scamper back. You'll know by the dog's body language, because the dog will be almost leaning on their back legs when they take the treat. So I'm not a big fan of anyone handing treats to the puppy. That's much later on, when my puppy or my dog is much more comfortable with people. And I'll either get the person, depending on how the puppy is doing, I might get the person to leave the house or leave the room, or I might see if the puppy calms enough and I'll give them a Phil Kong or a Chewy or something that they can engage with for a long period of time, all the while never allowing the person to interact with the puppy. The puppy will, or the dog will, let you know when they're ready for the interaction. This is hand targeting, or the touch command, and this is something that I always do with either dogs that have bitten or dogs that are nervous of people. It won't be something that I will start off with immediately, because it's too much pressure on a fearful dog, but it'll be something I'll be training my dog in the background so that I can teach them that hands are nice. It's a lovely, lovely, lovely exercise to do, especially if your dog has to go to a groomer or to a vet. It makes hands approaching a dog seem like a game to the dog, and it can be fun to the dog, and it makes them far less scary. Dogs do not like to be touched on the head, nor do they like to be touched. It's where their brain are. They naturally want to protect their brain just like a human being. But this is an exercise that really teaches a dog that actually it's like giving them a handshake, that they can touch you without feeling in any way threatened. And it's a lovely little exercise that I'll do when a dog knows it really, really well. Then I'll start doing with strangers when they meet a fearful dog, and they'll put their hand out, and I'll get the dog will go over and touch their hand, and then I will give the dog a treat. The stranger doesn't need to in that kind of scenario. And it just means that if my dog goes to the vet or if my dog goes to the groomer, then they have that ability. It also is helpful for recall, and it's also helpful for loads of other things. But you'll get loads of videos on YouTube explaining how you do that, and it's really, really, really easy, especially if your dog is food motivated. Fetch is another little exercise that I love to do with fearful dogs if I teach the dog a good fetch, because then I can, for dogs that aren't food motivated and aren't, maybe if they're stressed that they don't eat food, but they might play with a ball, then what I'll do is I'll start to include strangers in my game. And what the dog will do is they'll bring the ball back to me. I'll hand the ball to the stranger will throw the ball. And we'll get in this kind of little fetch triangle that we're kind of doing. And the reason that fetch is a really good game, because it's totally play orientated, it's really good fun for the dog. But it means that the stranger isn't handling at them, the stranger isn't touching them, and the dog can control what distance they are from the person, but while playing a really good game. So we usually do that little game for a little while, and then the dog will often bring the toy back to the stranger, which is lovely. I did this with my own dog. I had a dog who I adopted who didn't like children, and then I subsequently had a child. And I went, oh dear, this wasn't part of the plan. So fetch was something that I really relied on. And now I have a very small fluffy dog who's addicted to fetch with children and strange children in the park sometimes. But it's a really, really good game. I find it really successful for those dogs that are either when they're too nervous to eat or they're not very food motivated, but you can, because it's fetch is something that you can teach very independently of a stranger. So once your pup or your dog is no longer fearful, you have to make sure it's of all people, okay? So you cannot just socialize and start to desensitize or do the training with just a few people in your inner circle. There's people that look very, very different than us. There might be people in wheelchairs, people of different nationalities, and you'll have to do handling exercises so that your dog is safe for groomers and vets and other professionals to kind of interact with your dog. But that's a long way down the list of getting your dog. Your dog has to be comfortable meeting people and excited to approach people before you'd ever do handling exercises with a stranger. Restraining a dog against their will just makes it really, really uncomfortable for the dog, and they're more likely to aggress or not want that interaction in the future again. Teaching your dog basic words that helps them, and any communicating with your dog really helps. And teaching your dog, your fearful dog, a good recall is also really important should they happen to get spooked or get off the lead. So when we're dealing with fearful pups, these are just things to remember. You want to manage the scenario that you're in. So you want to make sure that your dog isn't exposed to anything scary or any people that are scary without being either able to train or able to avoid it. So avoiding crowded areas, using a lead or crate or baby gate to prevent strangers interacting with your dog. Don't feel afraid to say, sorry, but my dog is uncomfortable with people she doesn't know. Sometimes I've even told people that stay away, the dog will bite, even though I know the dog won't, but that's to protect the dog. A lot of people think that just because my dog is fearful doesn't mean that they're scary, but that's their own issue. It's up to you to protect and make sure that you put yourself between the dog and the stranger, and create distance. Take it slowly and don't rush it. You're doing behavior modification. You're trying to change the emotional response of a dog who doesn't really have the neurological connections to be able to do that very well. So take it slowly, really, really slowly, and be really, really patient. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got something from it, and I hope it made sense. Thank you for listening.